Maybe it's a parent who never said the thing you needed to hear. Maybe it's a friend who disappeared exactly when you needed them to stay. Maybe it's someone who said your name like it was an insult, in a voice you can still hear if you're quiet enough at night. You have built a whole courtroom around that face. You have rehearsed the closing argument 100 times, what you should have said, what they should have known, how obvious their cruelty was, how invisible your pain was to them. You have made them the villain of your story, and somewhere in making them the villain, you made yourself the victim. Forever, on a loop. And it feels like justice. It feels like clarity. Finally, someone to blame. But notice something. Notice how tired you are. Notice how the anger doesn't burn them anymore. They've moved on. They've forgotten. They're living their life somewhere completely unaware of the trials still running in your head. The only person still in that courtroom is you. What if the person who hurt you was never actually the enemy? Not because what they did was fine, it wasn't, but because somewhere along the way, you handed them a power they never should have had. The power to define the rest of your life from a single wound. Think about how much space they still take up. The way their name can change the temperature of a room. The way a stranger who resembles them, even slightly, a certain laugh, a certain posture, a certain way of going quiet mid-conversation, can put you right back in that old moment, years later, in a completely different life. That is not a small thing. That is a kind of ongoing residence, and most of us never stop to ask whether we actually want them living there. That confusion, that ache of loving someone as a villain or hating someone you once needed, is not weakness. It's the beginning of understanding something most people never face. The man who understood this better than almost anyone was a Russian novelist named Fyodor Dostoevsky. He knew what it meant to be genuinely wronged. He was arrested for his political beliefs, marched in front of a firing squad, and pardoned only in the final seconds. A mock execution designed to break him psychologically. He spent years afterward in a Siberian prison camp among murderers and thieves, then lived much of his adult life buried in gambling debt, watching people he trusted betray and exploit him. He had every reason to become a man defined by his enemies, the officials who sentenced him, the guards who mocked him, the friends who vanished the moment he became inconvenient. Instead, his novels became studies of something stranger. How the people who wound us are rarely the true battlefield. The real battlefield, he kept showing us, is what we do with the wound afterward, inside ourselves, long after the people who caused it have moved on with their lives. Dostoevsky once suggested that man is a creature who can get used to anything, and the danger is that we can get used to living inside our own grievance until we mistake it for our identity. He watched this happen to men in the prison camps around him, men who had been genuinely wronged by circumstance and cruelty, and he noticed how some of them slowly hardened into their bitterness, while others, somehow, kept a kind of aliveness underneath it all. The difference wasn't the severity of what happened to them, it was what they let it mean. In this video, we're going to walk through 6 psychological truths from Dostoevsky's life, and work that explain why the people who hurt you were never actually your real enemy, and who, or what, was. We'll look at why blame feels like protection, but quietly becomes a prison. We'll look at the strange freedom hiding on the other side of forgiveness, not forgiveness for their sake, but for the architecture of your own mind. And near the end, we'll reach the moment Dostoevsky considered the actual turning point of every human life. The moment you stop being a character in someone else's cruelty and become the author of your own recovery. Stay until the end, because the 6th truth is the one that changes how you'll remember this entire chapter of your life, not by erasing what happened, but by finally placing it where it belongs. Chapter 1, the face you keep replaying. Every person carries at least one face like this. Someone whose actions became the reference point for their own worth. A mother's silence, a father's fists, or worse, his indifference. A partner who left without explanation. A friend who chose someone else when it mattered most. What happens after the event is almost more important than the event itself. The mind, trying to make sense of pain, does something quietly devastating. It builds a permanent exhibit. It preserves the moment in perfect detail, the tone of voice, the exact words, the way the light fell in the room, and installs it as evidence in an ongoing case that never closes. Dostoevsky understood this instinct intimately because he lived inside grievance for long stretches of his own life. In his notebooks and letters, he often circled back to the same insight. Suffering doesn't disappear when you catalogue it. It calcifies. The more precisely you can recall an injury, the more real estate it occupies in your identity, until you're no longer just a person who was hurt, you're a person built around having been hurt. This is not your fault. The mind evolved to remember danger vividly, because remembering danger used to keep us alive. If a predator attacked you near a certain watering hole, your ancestors needed to remember that watering hole forever. But people are not predators at watering holes. People are complicated, contradictory, often as wounded as the ones they wound, and the mind's ancient alarm system doesn't know the difference between a saber-toothed tiger and a father who never learned how to love out loud. So you replay the face. You replay the sentence. You replay the moment they chose themselves over you. And each replay feels like protection, like you are guarding yourself against ever being fooled again. Here is the first quiet truth. The replaying was never really about them. It was about you trying, desperately, to answer a question they left open. Was I ever enough? And no amount of replaying the wound will ever answer a question the wound itself created. Consider a man I'll call Daniel. For almost a decade, Daniel carried a specific memory of his older brother laughing at him in front of their whole family, calling him weak in a way that followed him into every job interview, every relationship, every mirror he stood in front of too long. Daniel didn't think of himself as an angry person. He thought of himself as someone with high standards, someone who simply didn't tolerate disrespect. But underneath that framing was a boy still standing in that room, still hearing that laugh, still trying to prove to a brother who probably doesn't remember the moment at all, that he was never weak. That is the shape grievance takes. It disguises itself as strength, as standards, as never being fooled twice. But it is, underneath, still a child standing in a doorway, waiting for someone who already left the house. Notice how specific the mind is about which wounds it chooses to preserve like this. Not every hard moment becomes a permanent exhibit. The ones that do are almost always the ones that landed on ground already softened by something unresolved. A question about your worth that was fragile long before that particular moment happened. The brother's laugh didn't create Daniel's fear of being seen as weak. It found a place that was already tender and pressed on it precisely. The wound didn't invent the vulnerability, it located it. This distinction matters enormously because it changes what healing actually requires. If the wound only found an old vulnerability, then endlessly replaying the wound itself will never touch the real issue underneath. You can win the argument with your brother 1,000 times in your head, deliver the perfect comeback, watch him finally understand how wrong he was, and still wake up the next morning with the same fragile question sitting quietly where it always has. Was I ever enough, apart from what I prove? The replaying was never going to answer that question. It was never designed to. Only you can answer it, and not by defeating anyone in a courtroom that exists only in your own head. Dostoevsky's characters are full of men like this. Men who mistake their wound for their personality, who cannot tell anymore where the injury ends and where they begin. And the tragedy he keeps returning to is not that they were hurt, it's that they never got to find out who they might have been without the hurt organizing everything underneath it. Think about how much of your own energy, across how many years, has gone into staying ready for a version of that moment to happen again. The guardedness in new friendships, the preemptive distance in relationships, the way you sometimes brace for disrespect that hasn't even arrived yet and may never arrive at all. That readiness has a cost, even when it never gets used. A nervous system that stays braced for old danger doesn't get to fully rest in present safety, even when present safety is real, abundant, and standing right in front of you, offering you something the past never did. You are allowed to remember what happened to you. Memory is not the problem. The problem is when memory becomes management, when the wound is quietly running your calendar, your relationships, your sense of what you're allowed to want, what you're allowed to trust, who you're allowed to become. That's not remembering anymore. That's residency. And you can live somewhere without it being your home. Anger feels like power because for a moment it is. It straightens your spine. It gives your voice an edge it didn't have when you were the one being hurt. Anger says, never again. And there is something genuinely necessary in that, a boundary, finally, where there wasn't one before. But Dostoevsky was fascinated, almost obsessively, by what happens when anger stops being a response and becomes a residence. In Crime and Punishment, his character Raskolnikov doesn't commit his terrible act out of simple greed. He commits it partly out of a theory he built to protect himself from feeling small, from feeling like one of the ordinary people the world seemed to discard without a second thought. The anger at being overlooked curdled, slowly, into something that justified almost anything. This is the pattern worth noticing in your own life, at a much smaller and more forgivable scale. The anger you built after being hurt was meant to be a shield. Somewhere along the way, though, shields can become the only clothing you know how to wear. You stop taking it off even in rooms where no one is attacking you. You bring it to new relationships, new friendships, new opportunities, and the people standing in front of you now have to fight through armor that was built for someone else entirely. There is a woman I'll call Renata who spent years after a painful divorce describing herself as just realistic now. She didn't trust easily. She kept new partners at arm's length, tested them constantly, waited for the betrayal she was sure was coming. From the outside, it looked like self-protection. From the inside, it felt like wisdom hard-won. But what it actually was, quietly, was a woman still fighting her ex-husband in every new relationship, still armored for a war that had already ended, against a man who wasn't even in the room anymore. The tests Renata ran on new partners were never really about them. They were about extracting, from a completely different person, proof that would finally settle an old case. Every small disappointment from someone new got filed as evidence in a trial about someone old. And because the trial could never actually be settled this way, because no new partner could ever answer for an old partner's betrayal, the case simply never closed. It just kept collecting new defendants who hadn't committed the original crime. This is the strange trick grievance plays. It convinces you the armor is protecting you from future pain, when often it's the very thing manufacturing your present pain. The walls you built to keep the old wound out are now the walls keeping new love, new trust, new life from getting in. And the cruelest part is that this usually happens quietly enough that you don't notice it happening. You simply start to believe this is who you've always been, careful and guarded and wise, rather than recognizing it as a costume you put on for one specific war that ended a long time ago. There's a version of this that shows up in less obvious places too, not just romantic relationships, but friendships, work, even the way you receive a simple compliment. Someone offers you something good, something true, and a reflex fires before you can stop it. What do they want from me? What's the catch? People don't just give things for free. That reflex isn't wisdom. It's an old alarm system, still wired to a threat that isn't in the room, going off at the sound of kindness, because kindness once preceded betrayal, and the nervous system never got the memo that this is a different person, a different room, a different chapter entirely. Modern psychology has caught up with something Dostoevsky sensed through pure observation a century and a half ago. Researchers studying chronic anger and unresolved resentment have found that the body doesn't distinguish well between an old threat being remembered and a new threat actually present. The nervous system activates almost identically either way, which means every time you replay the wound in anger, some part of you is living through it again, physiologically, as if it were happening now. The person who hurt you gets to hurt you once. Unprocessed resentment lets them hurt you daily, for free, without ever knowing they're doing it. That's the quiet devastation hiding inside the armor. It doesn't punish them. It punishes you, on their behalf, forever, unless you put it down. Putting it down does not mean pretending it didn't happen. It does not mean inviting them back in, or excusing what was inexcusable. It means recognizing that the armor has done its job. It kept you alive through the worst of it, and now it's allowed to rest. You are allowed to walk without it. You are allowed to feel exposed for a while, because underneath armor, there's always a body that has to remember how to breathe on its own again. This is slower than it sounds, and it should be. Nobody takes off years of armor in a single afternoon. The goal isn't to arrive at total openness overnight. It's to notice, gently, each time the armor puts itself on for a war that isn't actually happening, and to ask a simple, unglamorous question. Is this person, right now, in front of me, actually the person who hurt me? Or am I dressed for a battle that ended a long time ago? Most of the time, once you actually ask, the answer arrives quickly and quietly, and the armor gets a little lighter every time you notice. Chapter 3. The freedom you were afraid of there is a strange comfort in staying angry at someone. As long as they remain the villain, you never have to ask harder questions. About your own choices, your own patterns, your own responsibility for what happens next. Dostoevsky wrote about this discomfort with freedom in one of his most famous ideas, sometimes called the parable of the Grand Inquisitor. In it, a church official argues that most people don't actually want freedom. They find it unbearable. Freedom means uncertainty, means the terrifying responsibility of choosing your own path without someone else to blame if it goes wrong. Most people, the Inquisitor claims, would trade freedom for comfort and certainty in a heartbeat, even if that certainty comes wrapped in submission. Blame is a kind of false certainty. As long as someone else is the reason your life looks the way it does, you don't have to face the much scarier possibility that you are now free, and freedom means the next chapter is entirely yours to write, with no one left to hold responsible if you waste it. This is why some people cling to their grievances long after the original wound has scarred over. Not because they enjoy the pain, but because the alternative is more frightening, standing in an open field with no one else to blame, holding a life that is now, undeniably, yours to build. It helps to notice what blame actually gives you, even as it costs you. It gives you a villain, and villains are simple. They don't require the complicated work of understanding someone's own history, their own wounds, the reasons they became capable of hurting you the way they did. It gives you a reason, and reasons are comforting, even painful ones, because a life that makes sense. Even a life that makes sense as a tragedy is easier to live inside than a life that feels random, unexplained, unfair without a clear author. Blame is, in a strange way, a form of meaning-making. The trouble is that it's meaning borrowed against your own future, and eventually the debt comes due. Think about a man I'll call Aaron, who spent years attributing every professional setback to a boss who had once humiliated him in front of colleagues early in his career. It was real, the humiliation happened, and it was cruel. But a decade later, Aaron was still explaining his stalled career using that one boss as the villain of the story, even though he hadn't worked for that man in 9 years. As long as the boss remained the reason, Aaron never had to ask the more uncomfortable question, what have I done or failed to do in the 9 years since? That question is the freedom Dostoevsky's Inquisitor warns most people will run from. It is much easier to live in a story where someone else holds the pen. It is much harder and much more dignified to pick the pen back up yourself. Notice how convenient the old story becomes over time. It explains everything without requiring anything. It accounts for the stalled career, the failed relationships, the years that seem to slip by without much changing. And it does all of that without ever once asking Aaron to examine a single choice he made after the humiliation itself. The boss becomes less like a memory and more like a permanent alibi, always available, always sufficient, always keeping the harder questions comfortably out of reach. There is a particular kind of exhaustion that comes from living this way, even though it looks, from the outside, like comfort. Aaron wasn't lazy. He worked hard, in fact, at defending a story that had stopped needing defense years earlier. All of that effort, the energy spent rehearsing the injustice, explaining it to anyone who would listen, weaving it into every setback that followed, could have gone somewhere else. Into a skill, into a new direction, into a version of his career that had nothing to do with proving an old boss wrong. Grievance is expensive. It just charges you in a currency you don't always notice you're spending: time, attention, the years you don't get back. Notice that this isn't about excusing the boss, or the ex, or the parent, or whoever occupies that role in your own story. Their actions were theirs, and they remain accountable for them in whatever way life holds people accountable. But your response to those actions, every day from this point forward, is no longer theirs. It's yours. That transfer of ownership is uncomfortable precisely because it's real. It means no one is coming to fix this for you. It also means no one can stop you from fixing it yourself. Freedom, in this sense, isn't a reward. It's a burden you get handed the moment you stop waiting for the person who hurt you to apologize, explain, or make it right. Most people never pick it up. They'd rather keep the case open forever than face what it means to close it, because closing it means admitting the pen has been sitting there, unclaimed, for longer than they'd like to admit. Hashtag chapter 4. The underground man in the mirror there is a character Dostoevsky created who has haunted readers for over a century, a bitter, isolated narrator known simply as the underground man. He is brilliant, articulate, and almost entirely consumed by resentment. He spends the entire novel explaining, in exhausting detail, exactly why everyone around him has wronged him, why society is cruel and stupid, why he alone sees clearly how unfair the world is. But the deeper the reader goes, the clearer it becomes. The underground man's real enemy was never the people he blamed. It was the version of himself he built in the basement of his own mind, spiteful, isolated, endlessly self-justifying, unable to accept love or connection even when it was offered to him. Because accepting it would mean giving up the identity of the wronged, superior outsider. This is the uncomfortable mirror this chapter asks you to look into. Somewhere in the process of being hurt, many of us build our own underground room. We furnish it with evidence of everyone who failed us. We decorate the walls with the story of how uniquely unfair our situation has been. And slowly, without quite noticing, we start preferring the basement to the world above it. Because in the basement, we're always right, and being right feels safer than being loved. There is a specific comfort to being right that's worth naming honestly. Being right doesn't require risk. It doesn't require the vulnerability of trying again, of trusting again, of being disappointed again by someone new. Being right about how unfair everyone has been is a closed system. It never asks anything more of you than continuing to believe it. Being loved, by contrast, is an open system. It requires you to keep showing up, keep being seen, keep risking that the next person might also let you down. No wonder the basement starts to feel safer. It's not that people in the basement don't want love. It's that the basement doesn't ask them to survive the possibility of losing it again. The people who hurt you may have opened the door to that basement, but you're the one who moved in. You're the one who kept the lease going long after they left the building entirely. Some people live in that basement for so long they forget there was ever a door, forget there was ever a version of them that lived upstairs, in the light, taking the ordinary risks that ordinary trust requires. This is the point in the story where it's worth pausing on something modern psychology has independently confirmed. Researchers studying shame and self-protection have repeatedly found that when people can't process an injury directly, they often build an identity around it instead, sometimes called a trauma identity or protective narrative, because an organized story of victimhood, however painful, feels more manageable than the chaos of an unresolved wound. The story gives shape to pain that would otherwise feel formless. But the story also has a cost. It can quietly become a cage disguised as an explanation. There's a related idea from attachment research worth sitting with here too. The observation that people often recreate familiar emotional patterns even when those patterns hurt them, simply because familiar pain can feel safer than unfamiliar peace. A nervous system raised on distance may actually feel suspicious of closeness, not because closeness is dangerous, but because it's unfamiliar. And unfamiliar things get flagged as risk even when they're exactly what a person needs. This isn't a flaw in character, it's a pattern worth noticing with compassion, because noticing it is the first real step toward loosening its grip. Dostoevsky's genius was noticing this almost 100 years before psychology had language for it. The underground man isn't tragic because he suffered. He's tragic because his suffering became the only room he knew how to live in, and he chose it, over and over, even when the door was unlocked. You are not the underground man. But there may be a smaller, quieter version of him living somewhere in how you talk about what happened to you, in the way certain conversations always circle back to the same old proof, the same old case for why you were right to close yourself off. Notice him gently, not with shame, but with curiosity. He was trying to protect you. He just never learned that the door was never actually locked. Try, just for a moment, to picture that door, not as a metaphor to admire, but as something with an actual handle, at an actual height, within actual reach. Notice how long it's been since you tried it. Notice the story you tell yourself about why trying it again isn't safe yet, isn't time yet, wouldn't work anyway. That story has kept you company for a long time. It may even feel like part of your personality by now. But a story that only ever protects you from the world above the basement was never really protecting you. It was just keeping you from finding out what else might be true. Chapter 5. The enemy who is never real this is the moment where the whole story finally has to break open. Because here is the truth that is almost too uncomfortable to say out loud. If you have spent years building your identity around what someone else did to you, some part of you needs them to remain the villain. Not because you're weak, and not because you're wrong about what happened, but because as long as they're the villain, you never have to sit with the far more painful possibility underneath, that the years since then were also, in some part, shaped by choices only you were making. This is the collapse Dostoevsky returns to again and again in his novels. The moment a character can no longer sustain the story they've been telling themselves. Raskolnikov cannot keep believing he committed murder for some grand, exceptional purpose. Eventually, the theory crumbles under the weight of what he actually did and who he actually is. The underground man cannot keep believing his isolation is a form of superiority. Eventually, the loneliness becomes too loud to argue away. Every one of Dostoevsky's most memorable characters reaches a point where the story they built to survive their pain becomes the very thing suffocating them. You may be closer to that point than you think. Maybe it's shown up as exhaustion you can't quite name, a tiredness that sleep doesn't fix, because it isn't really about sleep. Maybe it's shown up as a pattern you've started to notice in yourself, a way you sometimes push away good things right when they start to feel real, as though some part of you doesn't trust good things to stay, or doesn't quite believe you're the kind of person good things happen to anymore. Maybe it's shown up simply as a growing sense that the story you've been telling, about who hurt you, and why and what it made you become has started to feel heavier to carry than it once did to build. That heaviness is not a sign that something is wrong with you. It's a sign that the story has done everything it can do. It protected you when you needed protecting. It gave you a way to make sense of something senseless. And now, like a splint left on a bone long after it's healed, it has started to hold you back from the very movement it was originally meant to help. Ask yourself, honestly, in this moment, who are you underneath the story of what they did to you? Not the version of you shaped in reaction to them, angry, guarded, proving something, avoiding something. The actual you, the one who existed before the wound, and who has been waiting patiently this whole time for you to stop defending the case long enough to come home. This is the moment a woman I'll call Sophia finally understood, 12 years after her mother's cruelty had defined nearly every relationship she'd had since. She had built her entire adult identity around being the strong one, the one who didn't need anyone, who had learned the hard way not to trust affection, who kept a careful, permanent distance from anyone who tried to get close. It had felt, for over a decade, like wisdom, like the lesson she'd earned the hard way. Sophia could tell you, in precise detail, every reason her guardedness was justified. Her mother's coldness, the years of conditional love, the way affection always seemed to come with a price she couldn't quite name until it was already being collected. None of that was untrue. All of it happened. And for years, that truth was enough to explain everything that came after, every relationship she ended before it could deepen. Every time she mistook someone's ordinary affection for a manipulation she needed to preempt, every friendship she quietly let fade rather than risk needing someone who might eventually leave. But one night, exhausted from another relationship she had quietly sabotaged before it could get serious, she realized something that broke her open in the best possible way. Her mother hadn't been in the room for 12 years. Every wall Sophia had built, she had been building and maintaining entirely alone. The woman who hurt her had, in some very real sense, stopped being the enemy the moment she walked out the door all those years ago. The enemy that remained, the one still actively causing damage, still pushing away every good thing that came near, was the fortress Sophia herself had kept constructing, brick by brick, in her mother's name. What made this realization so disorienting wasn't the sadness of it, though there was plenty of that. It was the sheer scale of what it meant to finally see. Sophia wasn't simply grieving what her mother had done. She was grieving 12 years of her own architecture, 12 years of a life quietly, carefully organized around defending against a threat that hadn't actually been present for most of it. That is a strange kind of loss. You don't just lose the years, you lose the version of yourself who might have lived them differently, and you have to make peace with the fact that she's gone too, along with everything else the old story cost you. This is not a comfortable realization. It does not arrive gently. It arrives, usually, in the middle of the night, or in the wreckage of a relationship you sabotaged for reasons you couldn't quite explain, or in a long silence after a fight where you finally hear yourself sounding exactly like the person who once hurt you. The same coldness, the same conditional warmth, passed down not because you wanted it, but because it was the only blueprint you were ever handed. Dostoevsky believed suffering, faced honestly, is never wasted, that it can become the exact material from which a truer self gets built, but only once you stop protecting the old story from the truth. The people who hurt you did real damage. That is not in question. But the ongoing war, the one still costing you relationships, peace, trust, joy, that war has for a long time now had only one soldier left on the field. You. This is the turning point. Not because the pain disappears. It doesn't. Not all at once, and maybe not ever completely. But because from this moment forward, you get to ask a different question than the one you've been asking for years. Not how do I make them pay for what they did, but who do I want to become, now that I finally understand the war was never really with them at all? That question is harder than the old one. It's also the only one that actually leads somewhere. Notice, too, that this turning point does not require the other person to change, apologize, or even exist in your life anymore. That's what makes it a turning point and not a negotiation. Negotiations require two people. This requires only you, in a quiet room, finally willing to look at the war you've been fighting and ask honestly who's still on the battlefield. Most of the time, when you look closely enough, you'll find you've been standing there alone for years, swinging at a shadow, exhausted, while the actual person who cast that shadow walked away long ago and never looked back. Chapter 6, the dignity that survives the wound. Dostoevsky spent much of his life fascinated by a very specific kind of dignity, not the dignity of people who were never hurt, but the dignity of people who were hurt badly and still, somehow, refused to let the hurt author the rest of their story. This dignity doesn't look like triumph. It doesn't announce itself. It's quieter than that. It looks like a person who can finally say what happened to them without their voice shaking. It looks like someone who can see the person who hurt them clearly, not as a monster, and not as forgiven either necessarily, but simply as a limited, flawed, often wounded human being who did damage they may never fully understand or answer for. And it looks like someone who no longer needs that person to apologize in order to move forward, because the moving forward stopped depending on them a long time ago. This kind of dignity is not handed to you. It's not something that arrives because enough time passes, or because you finally win an argument that's been running in your head for years. It's built, slowly, the same way the armor was built, except this time you're building something that can hold you, instead of something that keeps everyone else out. A man I'll call Mikhail spent nearly 15 years unable to speak his father's name without his jaw tightening. His father had been cruel in the specific, quiet way that leaves no visible marks. Cold silences instead of warmth, comparison instead of encouragement, a kind of contempt Mikhail spent his whole childhood trying and failing to earn his way out of. For years, Mikhail's entire personality was built in opposition to that man, wildly overachieving, unable to rest, terrified of anyone ever looking at him the way his father once did. Mikhail's achievements, from the outside, looked like success, promotions, recognition, a life that appeared, by any external measure, to be going well. But every accomplishment carried the same quiet subtext underneath it. See, I told you I wasn't nothing. He wasn't building a life. He was building an ongoing rebuttal to a man who, most days, probably wasn't thinking about him at all. The exhausting part wasn't the achieving. It was that no achievement ever actually landed the way it was supposed to. Each one was meant to finally silence the old verdict, and each one, instead, just bought a few days of quiet before the old question returned, asking to be answered all over again. What changed for Mikhail wasn't a reconciliation. His father never apologized, never even acknowledged the damage. What changed was smaller and, in its own way, more radical. Mikhail stopped needing him to. He began separating the fact of what happened from the ongoing verdict he had been rendering against himself every single day since. He could finally say, out loud, "My father hurt me. And that was wrong, and I am no longer on trial for it." Both things were true at once. The wound was real, and the war was over, because Mikhail had finally stopped fighting a man who wasn't even trying to fight back anymore. The difference this made wasn't dramatic on the surface. Mikhail still worked hard. He still cared about doing well. But the subtext changed. The achievement stopped being a rebuttal and started, slowly, being simply his. Chosen for its own sake, not as evidence in a case that had been running since childhood. That shift is quiet, almost invisible from the outside, but it is the difference between a life spent proving something and a life spent actually living something. This is the dignity Dostoevsky wrote toward his entire life, not innocence, not the absence of suffering. but a kind of hard-won sovereignty that suffering, faced honestly, can actually produce. Not despite the pain. Sometimes, strangely, because of it. You do not owe the people who hurt you your ongoing devastation. You do not owe them a lifetime spent proving they were wrong about you. Your dignity was never actually theirs to take in the first place. It only ever felt that way because the wound was loud enough to drown out the quieter, steadier voice underneath it. The one that never stopped believing you were worth more than what was done to you. This is worth repeating slowly, because it runs against almost everything grievance teaches you to believe. Grievance insists that your worth is something that has to be won back, argued for, proven through some eventual reckoning where the person who hurt you finally admits they were wrong. But dignity was never actually structured that way. It was never on loan from them in the first place. It's not something they gave you that they can now withhold. It's something that belongs to you, regardless of whether they ever see it, ever admit it, ever apologize for trying to take it. That voice is still there. It never left. It's just been waiting for the courtroom to close so it could finally speak, patient, unbothered by how long the trial has run, entirely unconcerned with whether the jury ever reaches a verdict, because it already knows the truth the trial was pretending to search for all along. Hashtag resolution and integration. None of this means the people who hurt you are suddenly excused. None of this means you have to reconcile with them, forgive them in the way that requires their presence, or pretend the damage wasn't real. Dostoevsky never wrote easy endings, and this isn't one either. What changes, if you let it, is smaller and larger at the same time. Smaller, because it doesn't require anything from them at all. No apology, no accountability, no acknowledgement they may never give. Larger, because it means the rest of your life stops being a rebuttal to something that already happened and starts being something that belongs, finally, entirely to you. This will not feel like relief right away. Grievance, for all its exhaustion, is familiar. Letting it go can feel disorienting, even grief-like, because you are losing something that organized your identity for a long time, even if that something was painful. It is normal to miss the certainty of the old story, even while you're building something more honest to replace it. Give yourself permission to grieve the years spent fighting a war that, in some sense, only you were still fighting. That grief is not weakness. It's the sound of a person finally putting down something heavy they didn't realize they'd been carrying every single day. You will probably reach for the old story again, more than once, in moments of stress or fear or disappointment. It's familiar. It's well-worn, it knows exactly where to fit in your hand. That's not failure. That's just what it looks like to unlearn something the mind spent years learning how to hold on to. There will likely be specific moments that test this. A stray comment that sounds just like something they once said. A situation that echoes the original wound closely enough to pull you right back into the old courtroom, gavel in hand, ready to reopen the case. When that happens, the goal isn't to never feel the pull. The goal is to notice it, name it gently, there's the old story again, and choose, this time, not to move back in. Some days that choice will be easy, other days it will take everything you have. Both are part of the same honest process, and give yourself permission, slowly, to imagine who you might become now that the courtroom is closed. Not a person without a past. Dostoevsky never believed in that kind of clean erasure, but a person whose past no longer gets the final word on the present. Someone who can hold what happened with both hands, honestly, without it defining every hand they reach out to hold afterward. This is where the work stops being about them entirely and becomes about the ordinary, unglamorous business of living. Learning to trust again in small doses with people who have actually earned it. Learning to rest without needing to prove something first. Learning to receive a kindness without immediately searching it for a hidden cost. None of this happens quickly. All of it happens more easily once the war is no longer running quietly in the background of everything you do. This is not forgiveness in the way it's usually sold, as a gift you hand the person who hurt you. It is something closer to what Dostoevsky spent his life circling. The recognition that your suffering, faced without flinching, can become the very ground your dignity finally stands on. Not because the wound was good, because you refused to let it be the only thing that was ever true about you. It's worth saying plainly, one more time, what this does and doesn't ask of you. It doesn't ask you to reach out to them. It doesn't ask you to explain yourself, defend yourself, or seek some final conversation that settles the score. It doesn't require them to ever know any of this happened inside you at all. What it asks is smaller, and entirely within your control, that you stop handing them the pen, that you let the story of your life include what they did to you, honestly, without letting it be the only chapter you ever write. The people who hurt you were never the real enemy. They were the wound. What you do with the wound, whether it becomes a war you keep fighting alone, or a scar you finally learn to carry with something like peace, that has always, quietly, been the real story. There is a face you used to keep replaying. Maybe you still do, some nights. That's allowed. Healing was never a straight line, and Dostoevsky never promised one. Only that the suffering, faced honestly, doesn't have to be wasted. He spent a lifetime writing toward this single idea in 100 different forms, that the wound is real, that the wound matters, and that what you build afterward is somehow still entirely up to you. But the next time that face appears, notice something different. Notice that the courtroom you built for them has been standing empty for a long time. Notice that you are the only one still showing up to argue a case no one else is contesting. Notice, too, how much room there might be in your life once that courtroom finally closes. Room for people who have never once tried to hurt you. Waiting patiently for you to trust that they're not who came before them. You are allowed to close it. Not for them. For the person who has been waiting, patiently, underneath all of it. This whole time, the one who was never actually on trial to begin with. The one who was worth loving before the wound happened, and who has remained worth loving every single day since, whether or not anyone ever said so. If this found you at a moment when you needed to hear it, stay a little longer. Share it with someone who's still carrying a courtroom of their own. Someone who might need permission, today, to finally close the case. This channel exists for exactly this, the slow, honest work of understanding ourselves through minds like Dostoevsky's, one truth at a time, one video at a time, one small act of self-recognition at a time. Because the people who hurt you were never the real enemy. And the moment you finally believe that, not as an idea, but as something lived, you get your life back.